There comes a moment in many relationships with a narcissistic person that feels confusing at first. Instead of becoming calmer, they become more intense. Instead of respecting your boundaries, they push against them even harder. Instead of accepting your decisions, they suddenly begin acting in ways that seem desperate, unpredictable, or even contradictory. Many people misinterpret this moment. They think, maybe they're finally changing. Maybe they finally realize how much they hurt me. Maybe this time will be different. But sometimes what you are witnessing is not genuine transformation. It is the realization that their usual methods of control are no longer producing the same results. For a long time, the relationship may have followed a predictable pattern. They criticized you. You defended yourself. They gave you the silent treatment. You chased after them. They blamed you. You apologized just to restore peace. They questioned your reality. You doubted yourself without even realizing it. You became trapped in a cycle where your emotional energy revolved around their behavior. Your happiness depended on their mood. Your confidence depended on their approval. Your peace depended on avoiding conflict. That cycle can continue for months, sometimes even years. But growth changes everything. Growth often begins quietly. It begins the day you stop asking, how do I keep them happy? And start asking, why have I stopped protecting my own peace? That single question becomes the beginning of emotional freedom. At first, the changes are almost invisible. You stop responding immediately to every accusation. You stop explaining yourself to someone determined not to understand. You stop accepting responsibility for emotions that are not yours to carry. You stop believing that every disagreement must end with your apology. These may seem like small decisions, but together they become powerful boundaries. And boundaries have a remarkable effect. They reveal the true nature of unhealthy dynamics. A healthy person usually responds to boundaries with curiosity and respect. They ask, help me understand. Let's work through this together. I didn't realize I hurt you. They may not always agree, but they are willing to communicate. Someone who depends on control often reacts very differently. Instead of respecting your boundary, they challenge it. Instead of listening, they argue. Instead of accepting responsibility, they increase the pressure. This is where many people become confused. They wonder, why are they suddenly acting worse now that I'm becoming healthier? The answer is often surprisingly simple. Because unhealthy patterns depend on participation. Imagine playing a game of tug-of-war. As long as both people keep pulling, the rope stays tight. The moment one person lets go, the game changes completely. The other person may stumble backward because they expected resistance. Emotional manipulation works in much the same way. It depends on predictable reactions. If criticism always makes you defend yourself, criticism continues. If guilt always changes your decisions, guilt continues. If silence always makes you chase, silence continues. But what happens when you no longer react the same way? The old strategies stop working. That can lead to stronger attempts to regain influence. Sometimes they become unusually charming. They suddenly compliment you. They promise to change. They remind you of happier times. They tell you, I've never loved anyone the way I love you. Things will be different now. You're overreacting. Can't we just go back to how things were? Notice those last words. Go back. Healthy people usually talk about moving forward. Controlling people often want to return to the version of the relationship where they held the power. Other times, the opposite happens. Instead of becoming affectionate, they become more critical. They question your character. They accuse you of changing. They call you selfish, cold, difficult, ungrateful. Why? Because confidence often feels threatening to someone who benefited from your self-doubt. When you stop questioning yourself, their ability to influence you begins to shrink. Many people mistakenly believe that boundaries create conflict. In reality, boundaries expose conflict that was already there. The boundary simply shines a light on it. Think about a locked door. A respectful person knocks. An entitled person keeps trying the handle. The problem is not the lock. The problem is the expectation that every door should always be open. Your emotional boundaries work the same way. They are not walls built to keep healthy people out. They are doors that protect your peace. People who genuinely care about you will respect them. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries may resist them. This is one of the hardest parts of healing, because there will be moments when guilt begins whispering to you. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I should explain one more time. Maybe I owe them another chance. Those thoughts are natural, especially if you have spent years placing other people's comfort above your own. But remember this, a boundary is not punishment. A boundary is information. It simply says, this is what I need in order to protect my well-being. Healthy people may not always like your boundaries, but they can respect them. Someone who repeatedly refuses to respect them is telling you something important, not about your worth, but about their willingness to honor yours. One of the greatest signs that you are healing is not that manipulation disappears. It is that manipulation becomes easier to recognize. You begin noticing patterns instead of isolated incidents. You stop making excuses. You stop believing every emotional outburst is your responsibility to solve. You understand that another person's reaction does not automatically mean your boundary was wrong. In fact, sometimes the strongest emotional reactions happen because your boundary is working exactly as it should. Imagine a person who has spent years controlling the thermostat in a room. Every time they felt cold, they changed the temperature. Every time they felt warm, they changed it again. Then one day, someone else quietly locks the controls. Suddenly, they can no longer change the environment whenever they want. Would they become frustrated? Probably. Not because the thermostat is broken, but because they lost control over it. That is what healthy boundaries often feel like to someone who has relied on control. They are not angry because your boundary is unreasonable. They are angry because it limits behavior they once expected to continue without challenge. Do not mistake their discomfort for proof that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes discomfort is simply the feeling of unhealthy patterns losing their influence. As your confidence grows, something beautiful begins to happen. You stop fearing another person's anger. You stop believing every accusation. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's opinion. You begin protecting your peace with quiet consistency, and that consistency becomes your greatest strength. Remember this. The goal of healing is not to make a narcissist respect your boundaries. You cannot control another person's choices. The goal is to respect your own boundaries so consistently that no one else's behavior determines how you value yourself. Because the day someone becomes desperate to regain control is often the day you finally realize something extraordinary. You are no longer living under the weight of their expectations. You are living according to your own values. And there is no greater freedom than becoming someone who chooses self-respect over fear, peace over chaos, and truth over manipulation. That is the moment your boundaries stop being words. They become the way you live. And once that happens, your life is no longer controlled by the reactions of others. It is guided by the quiet strength within you. There comes a point in every healing journey when something extraordinary begins to happen. The narcissist has not necessarily changed. Their words may still be the same. Their behavior may still be unpredictable. They may still criticize. They may still blame. They may still try to provoke arguments. But something inside you has changed, and that changes everything. For a long time, your emotions may have felt like they belonged to someone else. If they smiled at you, your day felt brighter. If they ignored you, anxiety filled your heart. If they complimented you, you felt worthy. If they criticized you, you questioned your value. Without realizing it, your emotional world slowly became connected to their behavior. It was as if they held the remote control to your happiness. Every word they spoke pressed another button. Approval made you feel accepted. Silence made you feel invisible. Anger made you feel guilty. Distant made you panic. And because your emotions responded so strongly, they never had to force control. They only had to trigger it. This is why emotional healing is so powerful. Healing is not about becoming cold. It is not about pretending you no longer care. It is about quietly taking that remote control back into your own hands. Think about that image for a moment. Imagine someone holding the controls to your peace for years. Every mood they experienced became your responsibility. Every emotional storm became your emergency. Every conflict became your burden to solve. Now imagine gently reaching out and taking those controls back, not with anger, not with revenge, but with calm determination. That is what healing feels like. You begin realizing something that changes your life forever. You are responsible for your emotions. They are responsible for theirs. That simple truth creates incredible freedom. Many people confuse peace with the absence of problems, but real peace is much deeper. Peace is remaining connected to your values even when someone else is trying to pull you into chaos. Peace is choosing not to defend yourself against every false accusation. Peace is understanding that not every criticism deserves a response. Peace is recognizing that silence can sometimes protect your dignity better than the perfect argument ever could. One of the greatest shifts in healing happens when you stop asking, "How do I make them understand me?" and begin asking, "Why do I keep needing someone committed to misunderstanding me to validate my truth?" That question changes your perspective because it moves your attention away from convincing another person and back towards trusting yourself. Trust is one of the first things emotional manipulation often damages. You begin doubting your instincts. You question your memories. You wonder if you are too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding, too difficult. Little by little, you stop trusting the person who knows your life best, yourself. Healing reverses that process. You begin listening to your intuition again. You notice how your body feels after conversations. You recognize emotional exhaustion instead of ignoring it. You stop dismissing your own discomfort simply because someone else tells you it should not exist. That is where genuine confidence begins. Not because everyone suddenly approves of you, but because you no longer require universal approval to believe your own experience. Imagine standing in the middle of a violent storm. The wind is strong, the rain is relentless. Everything around you feels unstable. Now imagine discovering a mountain. The storm still exists, but the mountain does not move. It remains grounded, it remains steady, it remains rooted. Your inner peace becomes that mountain. Life will still bring criticisms, disappointment, misunderstanding, conflict. But those experiences no longer shake the foundation of who you are. One of the most surprising things about emotional growth is that the narcissist often notices it before you fully do. They notice that you no longer react the same way. They notice that their insults no longer create panic. They notice that guilt no longer changes your decisions. They notice that silence no longer sends you chasing after them. At first, this may confuse them, then it may frustrate them, because the emotional patterns that once worked are no longer producing the same results. Imagine trying to unlock a door with an old key. For years, the key worked perfectly. Then one day, the locks are changed. No matter how often you try, the door remains closed. That is what your healing feels like to someone who once relied on emotional manipulation. The old keys no longer work, not because you became cruel, but because you became emotionally aware. Many people fear this stage. They worry that protecting themselves means they have become selfish. But there is a profound difference between selfishness and self-respect. Selfishness ignores other people's needs. Self-respect refuses to ignore your own. Healthy people understand that difference. Emotionally controlling people often do not. As your healing continues, another remarkable transformation begins. You stop explaining your boundaries repeatedly. You stop seeking permission to protect your peace. You stop believing that every decision requires someone else's approval. You begin making choices based on values instead of fear. That is emotional independence. Perhaps one of the greatest gifts of healing is that your attention slowly shifts away from another person's behavior. Instead of wondering, what are they thinking? You begin asking, what kind of life do I want to build? Instead of asking, why don't they appreciate me? You begin asking, am I appreciating myself? Instead of waiting for someone else's transformation, you celebrate your own. That is where true freedom lives. Not in changing another person, but in changing the relationship you have with yourself. Eventually, something beautiful happens. You stop measuring success by whether the narcissist apologizes. You stop measuring healing by whether they regret losing you. You stop measuring your worth by whether they finally recognize your value. Instead, you measure success differently. Did I honor my boundaries today? Did I protect my peace? Did I remain true to my values? Did I choose dignity over desperation? Those become your victories. And unlike another person's opinion, those victories are entirely within your control. Remember this. A narcissist's greatest source of influence is often emotional control. When they can predict your reactions, they can often predict your decisions. But the moment your decisions are guided by wisdom instead of fear, their influence begins to disappear. Your calm becomes stronger than their chaos. Your confidence becomes stronger than their criticism. Your boundaries become stronger than their manipulation. Most importantly, your peace becomes something they cannot touch. Not because life has become perfect, not because painful moments never happen, but because you have discovered something far more valuable than winning an argument. You have discovered yourself. The version of you that trusts your instincts, the version of you that protects your dignity, the version of you that understands your worth, does not rise and fall with another person's opinion. And once you discover that version of yourself, something extraordinary becomes true. A narcissist may still speak, they may still criticize, they may still attempt to provoke, but they can no longer control the place where your greatest strength now lives: your mind, your heart, your peace. Because true freedom is not found when another person changes. True freedom begins the day your inner peace no longer depends on whether they ever do. That is the victory no manipulation can steal. That is the confidence no criticism can weaken, and that is the kind of strength that stays with you for the rest of your life.